right, folks. Well, now we're going to pivot. We gave you a little taste of the role of data. I know it was probably just a teaser, but there's lots of good work and other examples to share as well. Now, let's shift gears a little bit and start talking about the role of continuous communication and community engagement. They actually fit together quite well. One of the best things that I remember reading a while ago, and it really lines up with what Paul was saying about, you know, this work, these community plans are way more dynamic and less rigid and linear than one would think in terms of an organizational strategic plan. And in the same way, engagement shouldn't be just the thing you do at the start of building a collective impact initiative, though it is critical at the start. It needs to be something that you're thinking about continuously throughout the lifespan of the work, right? Because ultimately you're accountable and acting in service of community. And so you need to be continually kind of sharing updates, creating opportunities for people to contribute. So let's move and dig a little bit deeper into what does this look like and what's involved. I think let's start with 6 big principles around continuous communication. First is that the community matters, right? And having lived and living experience of the issue is absolutely integral to challenging paradigms and giving people a new understanding of the issue from a different perspective. And while we have these diverse perspectives, it's the common agenda that we create together that gives us that unifying purpose. Why are we all here? It's rooted in an assumption that people are inherently creative, and that when you make changes in partnership with and alongside community, it's more likely that they'll succeed. And in fact, I believe personally that community residents are the single most untapped resource that we have in the work and making community change a reality. And that the other thing is, this kind of work means you're innovating, you're trying new things that, you know, that haven't been tested anywhere else. And so as you work across multiple groups, not only do you have the benefit of those different perspectives in terms of designing something that's more likely to succeed, but when things fall off, you know, things don't go as planned, the risk also doesn't land on one group or one organization, but rather it's diffused and diversified, distributed risk. And that's important when you're thinking about collaboration. On to the next. So communication and engagement fit together, because if an engagement strategy really builds a sense of shared ownership with the residents of the community, the communication strategy is how you continue to encourage and grow community buy-in. Does that make sense? Okay, on to the next. So we've talked about this already. The value of that 360 perspective is important and essential, not only because it helps us deepen our wisdom about the contributing factors behind an issue, but also because it gets at people's hearts, not just their heads. And, you know, you remember from the story in Erie, it's the passion and anger about 3rd grade reading being used to predict how many prison spaces we need that was as important a motivator for why people decided to choose it as the issue. So when you go out to build your common agenda, one of the things you want to be paying attention to is what gets people excited. And excited might be indignant, but excited might be, wow, we could really do something like in Iowa, let's all applaud, right? That's a really important sign that you're headed in the right direction. And what's beautiful about it is it helps everyone to really understand and have empathy for each other's perspective. and may, you know, for someone with lived and living experience, as they learn about some of the challenges of the different service providers, they may suddenly start to have a different level of appreciation around the complexity and challenge of responding to what they would feel was a pretty simple need. Okay, on to the next. So we at Tamarack often talk about experts, and we actually need different types of experts at the table. And specifically, we talk about the people who are born and raised in Singapore, know their neighborhood really well, have experience with this issue. Those are the context experts, right? And the content experts are the subject matter experts, like the child development specialists and whatever, who also bring valuable wisdom and knowledge and expertise to this conversation. But, you know, you can find the most promising approach that worked brilliantly in New Zealand and bring it to Singapore. It's not going to work. You've got a different culture. You may have different leadership from different sectors behind you. So at best, an idea from another place is an inspiration. And it's the people who live in your community who are going to tell you what of this brilliant idea from somewhere else would work here, or how you might need to tweak it so that it will. Make sense? On to the next. I love this. This is our bias. So as we talk about engagement, and continuous communication, we have to remember that we have a bias towards valuing learned experience and discounting lived experience. But the flip side of the coin, from a continuous communication point of view, is the power of the trusted messenger. Friends that we've worked with in Pennsylvania at the outbreak of COVID, there was no shortage of valuable, credible, easy to read information about how to keep you and your loved ones safe. But in the low income neighborhood that was predominantly African American, they didn't trust anything that was said by a white person, and especially an educated white person. So it didn't matter how well written the papers were, how clean and easy the directives were. The moment they started getting community champions from the neighborhood to do little video, 20-second video clips with here's a tip, here's a tip, here's a tip, boom, compliance went through the roof. Because I trust that person. That person is like me. I'm going to believe what they say. On to the next. So here's another thought. When you're thinking about continuous communication and engagement, rarely, if ever, does big lasting change happen as the result of one heroic leader championing an effort, right? In fact, one of Canada's most renowned social innovators, a fellow by the name of Alec Mansky, said he looked at 100 years of history in Canada, said there was no shortage of great ideas, but not all of them grew into powerful movements. So what were the differentiators that, translated some great ideas to being successfully implemented versus others? And one of the things he uncovered is that most successful lasting change is a partnership between three types of innovators. And I love how, so you think about this from a continuous communication engagement point of view. The first is the disruptive innovator. So he calls that the passionate amateur, the person motivated by love. Okay, so it's my daughter that was hit by a drunk driver, and honest to goodness, I am impassioned. I am going to make change happen. No family should ever live through something like what I've lived through. And in fact, the mother who started MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, that was exactly what motivated her. The court finding didn't go the way she'd hoped it would. And so she vowed in the courtroom that any time an issue related to drunk driving showed up on the docket, you would see her. She would be sitting in the front row and she would be wearing a red blouse as a statement to remember. The next court case that came up after her daughter's ruling, she walked into the courtroom, started to walk to the front with her beautiful red blouse on. The whole front row was filled with mothers wearing red blouses. That was the beginning. That's the disruptor. But unfortunately, that disruptor working alone is too easy to be dismissed by the system. Like we'll say, oh, but they just don't understand. We really care, but you know, there's all this precedent, there's all this case law, there's all this da 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 da. They just don't understand. So working alone, they don't get very far. However, if they link arms with the second innovator, things start to hum along. And that second innovator is called a bridging innovator, but they're really an intermediary. Sometimes they're a funder, right, who has credibility, and or a business leader, a credible person in the community of some standing. And they do two things. They reassure the disruptor, you know what, you're on to something. Don't give up. This is really important, right? And let me introduce you to my relationship network and help you build commitment and broaden this network. But they also challenge the disruptor. Okay, what happened to your daughter was tragic, but tell me the numbers. How many people are just like your daughter? And how many families go through exactly what you went through over the last year? And it's fine that you created a sense of the problem. What do you want to see happen? What are your recommendations about what changes need to be made, right? So bringing rigor is the other gift that the bridger brings to the mix. And those two get way further together. And the magic really happens when they link with the third innovator, who is the receptive innovator. And I think of them as the closet rebel within the organization, who knows that change needs to happen, who's eager to see something happen. And they do a couple of things. Inside their own organization, they start raising awareness. Say, well, gee, I've been reading a lot in the paper about drunk driving. Do we have a policy about drunk driving? Do we have a stand on this issue? What do we think we should do about blah, blah? What's our role around, right? So raising that question. And then the other thing they do is they say, okay, I can get you into the board meeting. And you know what? I need you to know that these board members are absolutely in alignment with you. These two are going to have straight faces, but they're going to trust that they're with you. There are two people who are likely to oppose, and here's what they're worried about. So if you can help find a way to allay their concerns, I'm sure you'll get their support. See how the magic works? This is why you want collaboration. This is why you want to engage that diversity of perspective. And that's why you need to be continuously communicating with folks to find out what's going on, where things are, and how to position what it is you're trying to achieve in a way that it can be heard, understood, and supported. Okay, on to the next. So really what that means for us in organizations is we have to reimagine our own role. Okay. And that means we have to shift from seeing ourselves as the doer and deliverer of an answer or a solution or a service, and instead shift to thinking of ourselves as the catalyst or the facilitator that holds space for these important conversations around issues that matter can happen with people who wouldn't necessarily otherwise get a chance to do that together. Okay, so it's a different type of skill, it's a different type of leadership, but no less important. On to the next. And at the same time, I think one of the things that we often think about is, just like with collaboration, when I talk about engaging someone, there are many, many, many different approaches. There's 5 different approaches or levels of engagement. The first 2 really focus on, we have the answer. So inform is, we've gone out, we've figured out exactly the answer. We can tell you what's happening and what we are going to do about it. So that's like the basic. Consulting is, well, there is this issue, we've looked at it, we've got 3 possible ways we could go to solve it, A, B, and C. Which option do you like and why? As you start moving to the right, you start to see that another method is to involve. So you're not coming with the solution, you're saying, okay, here's the problem that we have, right? And working with stakeholders to help generate solutions to the problem. But the ownership for delivering on that solution still rests with you. Okay, the next level, collaborate, and this is where we start getting into the space of collective impact, is we're bringing different partners together, and the commitment is around understanding and solving the issue and problem together, right? So it's a different level of commitment. And then lastly, empower is we never walk into a community that's a blank slate. So one of the best things that you can do as you're starting up a collective impact initiative is get familiar with what's already going on in the community, what has been tried, where, you know, what do we already know in terms of data, in terms of previous reports that have looked at the issue, whatever's there. How do you build on that and demonstrate that you haven't dismissed it and are pretending you're starting from ground zero without honoring what's come before you? Does that make sense? Okay, so one last thing about this, because we've talked a lot at our first session about how critical trust is. You know, community change happens at that speed of trust, and without trust, nothing's going to move. One of the biggest things to remember when you go out to engage in community and different stakeholders is that in many ways, you're always paying for the sins of poorly done engagement that came before you, because there is often mistrust and disappointment because of previous engagement that either hasn't lived up to expectations or got all the information but never circled back to let people know what happened to it and how it's influenced behaviors and changes. The biggest source of trust breakdown is when one group has an expectation of being asked to collaborate and actually experiences a group that is interested in just keeping them informed. So there's a disconnect around expectation. So managing expectation around engagement is key. Being able to tell people what is and is not on the table, right? We can focus in these areas, but you know, this is the mandate of, I don't know, a different organization, a different piece of legislation. So, you know, our boundary for now is this. People can respect those parameters. What they can't, what they struggle with and what breeds mistrust is learning about it after the fact, right? Or having, you know, learning that they were just giving ideas, but they wouldn't be involved in making decisions. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. Lovely to think about continuous communication as really touching on 3 points, 3 purposes, I guess. The first is to inform and get information around decisions. The second is about relationships. So each engagement that you do is an opportunity to strengthen and deepen a relationship that hopefully will be ongoing. And the final is to build knowledge and capacity and awareness, understanding. Okay, so you really have to be thinking about honoring all those things, or it's a missed opportunity. On to the next. So just as organizational leaders have to reimagine their role, community has to as well. Too often, we've trained citizens to think of themselves as service recipients and or taxpayers, right? Not remembering that they also have an obligation and a responsibility to help contribute to creating the kind of community they want to live in. So we've got to shift that paradigm when people come and you're engaging people who haven't historically been engaged. They're so used to thinking of themselves as a source of information or a recipient of service, they may be slow to really believe and trust that they can be a participant and ultimately a co-leader in helping to make this change happen. It's a process. Okay, on to the next. So lovely to think about relationships with community. There's doing to community, which is really that inform part of the continuum. Doing for community. So we ask you, well, we could do A, B, and C. What do you think? Doing with the community. So we're doing this with them, not necessarily with a lot of involvement and input. And then lastly, doing by community. So supporting the leadership of community itself. And what we're trying to do with collective impact is move much more into around that shared ownership. Okay, on to the next. This is really important. I think one of the earlier questions was about power and how do you manage power? One of the other dimensions of power that you need to be mindful of is when you bring organizational leaders and community leaders together at the same table. Sometimes someone with lived and living experience feels tokenized. And one of the contributors to that is we forget when we bring you both around the same table, an organizational person has the benefit of a network of colleagues behind them. They come already with a strat plan, a mission, a mandate, some deliverables, right? So they know what their parameters are and they're speaking on behalf of a group. If we bring ordinary neighbors to the same conversation, they get uncomfortable because I may be a person living in poverty, right? I may be a single mom with 3 kids, but my experience of poverty, I know, is very different from my neighbors who are a newcomer family, and different again from my neighbor across the hall who's a disabled senior. Who the heck am I to be speaking on behalf of all poor people in Singapore? Like, and I watch these, you all, and you're paying such close attention, and I can hear your sincerity around wanting to respond to my needs. And I feel like I'm afraid I'm going to mislead you, because we are not one thing, poor people, right? We are so diverse. So one of the best ways to counter this is to remember that residents speak in stories, but systems respond to patterns and themes. So actually, they end up talking across each other, because I will hear, as a service provider, I'll hear your heartbreaking story. I will have all kinds of empathy and want to do stuff, but I don't even know what to do, right, to fix your individual problem. So what's the most powerful thing we've seen is to bring, if there isn't an association of folks in poverty who can speak collectively, then part of the engagement is to bring diverse residents together to share their own stories with each other and say, okay, each one of you has your own story, but what are the common themes that are emerging across all our stories? That's what the system needs to hear. And by connecting them to their own constituency, when they come around the collective table, you've balanced some of the imbalances of power, because they are speaking on behalf of and much more aware of the nuances of a whole range of people just like them. Does that make sense? Okay, on to the next. I want to make sure we have time to do our exercise, but again, it's about remembering that, isn't it ironic that it's the people who typically have the least power that are the ones that are closest to the issue. And so that's why it is so particularly valuable and important that we think well, carefully, and intentionally about ensuring that those perspectives are there. On to the next. There we go. There's a quick overview. Getting those voices, getting that ownership, looking at them as a resource to help you disseminate information back, because they are the trusted messenger within their community. And using that knowledge that you bring together, all of you, to help inform your work. Okay, you ready to play around with this a little bit? If we can go to the next slide, Isaac, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to put you all back into your small groups, but before you go, we are going to put a mural link into the chat, because if you want to see this chart of the different types of engagement and be able to use it as a reference, that's how you will access it, okay? And what I want you to focus on is 2 things in your conversation. Thinking about what you want to accomplish in terms of your common agenda and collective impact effort. What level of engagement would you hope to achieve in the building and implementing of your collective impact initiative? And more importantly, given that, what are some of the important first steps that you might take to kind of build that foundation of engagement? Make sense? Okay. Isaac, do you have the link or do you want me to put it in? I've got it. Hang on.
I think I just shared it, but yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. So off to your groups, and if you click on that link before you go, and one of you can bring it up on your screen, then you can use that engagement continuum as a guide. And then I'm going to take the question, which is, what level of engagement would you hope to have to build your collective impact initiative? And what might be some of the first steps that you would take to make that a reality? And I will put that in the chat box for you, or in the broadcast box so you can all see it.
All right, groups are opening now, everyone. Good luck.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. That felt quick, I'll bet. Did it? All right. Anybody have any aha or question from your conversation, however brief?
I just think thank you so much for the insights, because very often we get it the wrong way around, and I think it's so powerful to start off first with the lived experiences and then work backwards from that, because at the end of the day, I mean, we're trying to help those who need help as well, and very often it's the other way around. You have your chair theory, your studies, your research, and then you try to like just apply it that way as well. But if we completely flip the order, we really start with the persons we help in mind, then their experiences, their experience and what they went through as well, and then we work backwards. It's such a much better way about going about it. I think sometimes there's always this reticence, like you're scared, like, well, what can beneficiaries tell us? Will they be able to actually understand what we're trying to do? And that's actually terrible, because it means there's a big bias in terms of us coming in as experts, thinking we know best as well. Yeah. I think probably maybe one of the biggest qualities you have to have as organizations, humility, to know that you don't have all the answers, and that really is probably like so critical in the whole attitude and approach to the whole exercise as well. Yeah, you're there to learn just as much as to also contribute as well.
Thank you so much, Tengi, because the other piece is, it's not just humility, but it's also vulnerability. You're going out and asking questions, as when you yourself have been trained to go out and expect yourself to deliver answers. And it's actually not that, right? Which feels unsettling.
If I can just add to that, I think the tendency as an organization that offers help is that you tend to want to swoop in to help the person, right? And so the irony is that you want to empower them, but how you empower them is by taking away the choice.
Their power.
Here's what's happening, here are the options, and then we ask them what they think, but we end up doing or taking charge of the situation, which doesn't really empower them. It actually takes away a lot of the choices from them, or the thought process at the very least that is required for them to feel in control of the situation. I find myself doing that a lot, because I'm a lawyer and I'm advising my client, and I'm telling my client, these are the things that you have to do it this way, and it really removes them from the situation and the I guess the catharsis that they feel when they end up making decisions and taking charge of the situation. So I really like the concept of moving towards empowering by making them critical and key players in the transformative journey that they're taking on, and in the change that we need to implement in their lives.
Thank you, Sarana, because the other piece that I know is we've structured our organizations in a very siloed kind of way. And the truth is, people live very holistic lives. They don't live these fragmented issues. We're making them run around. And often when you're dealing in collective impact, it's a complex issue that different sectors are trying to solve in small ways, but sending the person experiencing the issue all around in circles, right? To piece together little bits. And this collective impact is an opportunity to really look more holistically and collectively at that. But I am aware of time. I think we have maybe one minute for one more question, then we'll hand it off to wrap us up. Anybody? It's been a long morning. Okay, over to you, Mr. Paul Warren, please.
Wonderful. Hey everyone, thanks so much. That just whipped right by. That's like 3 hours. Just really appreciate your input and your enthusiasm. Isaac, do you want to just go to the next slide? Matter of fact, it's the next 2 slides. Do you want to go to the next one after that? No, just go back. Just remember this planning canvas and do take the time to fill it in. The other thing that's kind of cool about the planning canvas is if you printed it out or you had it separately on your computer, it does give you kind of like a Cole's notes, like a short version of the entire 9 hours that we're going to spend together. But there's little questions there for you to take and customize it and take some notes in that way as well. Isaac, next slide. Just if what you could do just as a way of us doing it together, do you want to just share in the chat box one idea you learned today that you will apply in your work? Just one thing that inspired you and that you feel is practical in the kind of change that you want to bring in the way that you want to show up in the world. Nice. Residents speaking stories. Data walk. Power of the data walk. Data from lived experience. Nice, Samuel. The valuing of lived experiences. Who are the we in the room? Content and context. Finding the right people, involving everyone. The idea of context experts. Keep going. There's lots more to come. I think we've got maybe only a third of you so far. Add one thought into the chat box. Nice. Shift in perspective. The role of community, content and context and contact experts and engagement strategy. Alvin, vulnerability is not a weakness. No shortage of great ideas, but not every one of them grows into a movement. Yasmin. Kimberly, thinking about how collective impact can be scaled at different levels. Charlotte, makes me think about how many Singaporeans are recipients versus participants. Pauline, moving away from strategic planning mentality to thinking together. Karen, committing style, not calculating style. Karen, again, building enthusiasm. Mode, to unthink and let go of what you think is right. Lots of great ideas here. Thank you all so much. And keep adding them as you go if you haven't added one, if you're still thinking. But let's go to the next slide, Isaac. Just generally, yeah, I mean, this is what we're doing in the chat box. So maybe it's a redundant slide. And because of time, let's just keep going. Just wanting to recognize that on Tuesday, we're back together again. So it's you're getting a lot of information in a short period of time, but there we're going to consider some really important activities. Like often in collective impact, people say, well, what's the backbone? Can we be the backbone? We want to be the backbone. Structure, infrastructure, the organization that makes it happen. And Sylvia is going to take us through a really important training on that. I'm going to be working on the idea of mutually reinforcing activities, but also just the idea of how do we actually achieve an impact. And then, of course, our all-time favorite, last module is we want to talk about understanding and measuring impact. What are we actually trying to do here? And what does the result look like? So that's all happening on Tuesday. Again, I'm going to paste it again here into the chat box. Isaac's going to send another communication to you tomorrow. Make sure you go to the resource page in between, and take a look at those great resources. We're going to have next Tuesday's PowerPoint is going to be up already tomorrow, so you can preview it. We're going to have some more documents for you to look at, and an endless supply of things for you to learn. On that note, just wishing you all a wonderful weekend. Tomorrow is Friday for all of you.
Thursday. Oh, Friday for you, yeah.
And then the weekend. So wishing you a wonderful, wonderful weekend. We're going to actually get 17 degrees. It's going from like minus 17 to plus 17 in just 2 days here in Canada. That's Canada in March. But of course, I don't ever have to ask you what the weather is like in Singapore, because it's almost always the same. And it's beautiful. So well done. Have a lovely weekend, everyone. See you back on Tuesday. Thanks again for hanging in here and for all your smiles.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Bye, Joseph.